welcome to... It's mid-November.
Oh my gosh, it's getting cold in the morning.
We are still recording this in advance. That is still a true statement, though. It is getting cold in the morning.
Yes.
Next week's going to be our Thanksgiving episode, and it will be released on Thanksgiving because we were releasing on Thursdays.
Oh, well, look at that. Isn't that just precious?
I chose Thursdays, so our Halloween episode would be out on Halloween.
I like it. Yeah, Thursday fun. What day's Christmas on? It's not on a Thursday.
No, it's a Wednesday. So we'll have a Boxing Day episode.
Awesome.
We'll do something special for Thanksgiving. That's going to be our next recording session.
I think we should just... we'll just bring like 10 different kinds of pies and we'll just eat them and tell everybody our experience of eating pie.
There is that pie company out of town that has wonderful hand pies. So maybe we could do something like that, at least for part of the episode.
Yep. We'll just like sit and enjoy some pie and love life.
So this episode we're going to do kind of a DM question thing, and I will let you kind of take the lead on that. Ask me the question, since you are the first time DM and I am in my 15th year of DMing.
Yeah.
And it's crazy when I put it that way, because it doesn't feel like it.
Is there like ranks? So, funny story, when I told my older sister that I was starting to play D&D, she gave me a lot of shit because she thinks it's funny to like make fun of nerdy stuff. So she was asking me if there's like rankings of like DM levels, and I like kind of strung her along a little bit. I forget what I said, but is there anything to that? Is there like you're a general now or something?
Joking, probably.
Yeah.
I think there are pros and cons to DM experience. One of the biggest so the biggest pro is you have an answer to almost every scenario. You don't have to think on the fly as much. You don't have to improvise, because it's just like, oh, this is like that one time in that other game. This is what I did in that other game. I'm going to just port that in. And that can be for any situation. Most longtime DMs, they'll have a notebook full of just dungeons. And they'll be like, yeah, I'm going to run this dungeon today. So there we go. Just a lot of the prep work you've done over the years, you can just port into whatever game you're playing. Like for you could take the Death House and just drop it into a campaign. Maybe you've got a campaign of like 10th level players, and you're just like, you know what? Let's see what happens when we put level 10 characters in the Death House. And then you do it. Or you put some harder things in the Death House. Maybe Lorgoth the Decayer, yes. I remembered it was does something or other. Maybe he has 2 or 3 shambling mounds that have budded off over the years. Excuse me. But on the other hand, the biggest con is having an answer for everything can get you to be very rigid, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah. I could see that. Because I guess one of the exciting and uncomfortable things about being a newer DM is this is all it's you're learning how to do this, and so you don't quite know the answers to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to kind of make judgment calls and do what you think would work best in the moment, which I really like. So, yeah. So I know in the first take of us talking about your experience and my experience, we talked about I think your initial experience, your initial time playing D&D.
Yeah, that's in our introduction episode.
Okay. So, another question about your experience would be like, how do you conceive of, or how do you kind of formulate how you're going to portray like an NPC or a monster?
It's a great question. It depends on the role that the character ends up having. Usually, I kind of default to he's a dick, or she, or whatever it ends up being. But
non-binary, maybe.
I think over the years I've had a few of those, or at least some NPCs where it's just like they could have been. Because a lot of times my NPCs, what gender they isn't important. But usually the players are going to be semi-antagonistic to an NPC, or be like, "Tell us everything you know, you complete stranger." And so defaulting to, you're essentially really insulting this character, and he's not gonna stand for that. That's not a bad fallback position.
Yeah.
I think you've even experienced that a little bit with just like, yes, I know you are a random stranger. You have information. I'm going to extract that information in a video game sort of way rather than a real life sort of way.
Yeah.
But it really depends on how important to the plot this character is and how much time I've spent prepping that character. Like Strahd, for example, even though he's got a lot written up in Curse of Strahd, I still spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to portray Strahd? Random NPC in Village of Barovia, where I don't even have their name, they're not really going to want to deal with the characters. It's going to be really shallow. It's probably going to be semi-standoffish for the reasons that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of good to be like, okay, what's the general disposition this area has to strangers? If I have to make a character on the fly, my starting point on their disposition is going to be what's the general overall disposition. And then, depending on a whole lot of factors, I will either stay to that disposition, or for this character, I will go, nearer or farther away in either direction.
Okay. So it sounds like you look at the context
Yes.
Where are the characters? What are they doing? What, what could they reasonably expect from the people they're interacting with?
Yep.
And then if you need to make adjustments based on personality or
how the characters are approaching that person.
Mm-hmm.
If you point to a random person on the street and go, "You there, peasant, tell me what Strahd has in his basement," the peasant's most likely going to say, "Fuck off."
Or not even say anything. He might just take a swig of wine and keep
Yeah.
moving.
But I mean, if someone pointed to you as you're walking down the street and went, "You there, peasant, what does Kate Brown have in her basement?" How are you going to respond to that?
A sex dungeon.
I mean, Kate Brown's awesome enough. She might.
Okay, so what else can we cover? How about just like what's your style in terms of, I know there's a huge range of approaches in terms of incorporating, the hard and fast rules from some of the books versus being more flexible versus being a combination of flexible and just using the rules of the book. How do you navigate that in your games?
I think it depends a lot on the system that I'm running. With 5th edition, I try to be very flexible and open, which is also what 5th edition is kind of built around. 3.5, which I do not run anymore, and I will not run again. There's so many rules for everything in that it's just like, okay, I'm gonna run what's in the core 3 books. That's it. I'm not gonna stray out of those, because your vampire half dragon gnoll that is a like arquebuster, that so you get the gnoll rules from this book, you get the half dragon rules from this book, you get the vampire template from this other book, you get the arquebuster class from a 4th book, and then of course you're using racial feats from 4 other books. I'm not for that, because that's how you have a character that breaks the game.
Yeah, that sounds like way more complicated than it should be.
Yeah, and also there were some books released for 3.5 that I don't even want to touch, including the infamous one that's about blue magic. And we're not going to get into blue magic because it's not okay.
So, I don't know if you would rank previous versions and current versions of D&D.
Okay.
But if you were going to, how would you rank them in terms of matching with what you like?
Okay, so I am not going to consider 3 editions of D&D for this. What's sometimes referred to as D&D 0, the 3 brown books, the original thing that came out. Never played those, never read them. Same thing with basic Dungeons and Dragons and the 1st edition of AD&D, which is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and that's what counts as the different editions, is editions of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. They don't do basic anymore. The 3 brown books are really old. 1st edition, haven't played. I've played 2nd. I've ran 3.5. I've ran 4. I've ran 5. I would rank them 4 and 5 kind of jostle for first position in my books. I'd rather play 5 than 4. I would happily run either edition. I think 4 has a lot going for it. It has a really bad reputation. That reputation is not earned.
What's the reputation? Out of curiosity.
Well, so 3.5 was, we have a rule for everything. And it's this very static thing. And the 4th edition was just like, okay, let's step away from that. Let's change almost everything. And also, it feels... A lot of people say that it feels a lot like an MMO. I would argue about how true that is, but even if it is true, it's not a bad thing. It is the one edition where fighters feel as powerful and complicated as wizards. And that's kind of a litmus test for me of if a game is good, is the easiest class versus the hardest class. Fighters in most editions, I walk up to it and I hit it. Wizards are like, this, in this context, this spell would work better, and a round later, that math has changed. In 4th edition, fighters are like, okay, in this context, this ability that I have works the best, so I'm going to choose that. I'm not going to walk up and hit it because that's what I do. 3.5 was very bad about that. There were just tons and tons and tons of spells, and the fighters would hit things and maybe once per battle do a feat. And 5th edition is kind of in the middle of those two, complicated wise. I would probably rank 5th edition higher than 4th, because, as I said, I would prefer playing 5th to 4th, and DMing, kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other. So that sounds like 5th edition barely ekes out 4th edition. And there's a decent sized gulf. And then I would put 2nd edition. And then there's... I haven't really played 3rd edition. It was out for like a year or two, and then 3.5 came out, so...
Do you know why that happened that way?
The ending years of 2nd edition is when Wizards bought out TSR. And TSR was the first company that they're the company that Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson made.
Yeah.
And 3rd edition was Wizards' first crack at making D&D rules. And they pretty quickly figured out that they had a better system that they wanted to release than 3.0, so they released 3.5. So 3.0 was kind of 3.5's beta testing phase. And so that most people are going to just consider those a single edition, even though they're technically 2 different editions, and 3.0 is slightly different, but it's mostly compatible.
What other RPG, like tabletop RPG games, have you experienced with or familiar with?
I'm gonna go real quick with ones that I've played or run. because one of my big hobbies is reading RPG rule systems.
Ooh.
Yes.
You are a wild guy. You know that?
I've played and/or run Ashen Stars, Shadowrun, Call of Cthulhu, and Legendary Quest. I have at least made characters and/or planned to play. I've also ran Traveler a little bit, and Fantasy Age, and a Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game. I almost forgot about those.
Wow.
And Vampire the Masquerade, and Scions, which are two things made by White Wolf. I think Scions needs a little more love than it has. You played the Children of Gods. And Mutants and Masterminds. I keep thinking of ones that I've played or run a couple of times, and it's just like, oh wait, I've also done this one and this one. But I've read things for... one of the most off-the-wall ones is Starship Troopers has a system.
Yeah.
There's a couple based on Warhammer 40k. Warhammer Fantasy 2nd edition. Specifically that edition. They recently came out with the 4th edition that I'm kind of interested in. Quinn, the Warring States. Or Qin, the Warring States. It's about ancient China. Kind of a low fantasy ancient China martial arts game, which I want to run that soon. A whole bunch. Stars Without Numbers. The Modiphius Star Trek rules. Their Fallout rules.
Yeah.
A lot of others. Pugmire, I actually have a copy of that right next to where you're sitting.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to run that sometime. Where... Actually... I bet we could get your son to sit down and play Pugmire with us.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Because it's essentially D&D, except everyone is playing dogs. Like, anthropomorphic dogs.
That's awesome.
I think you would dig that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he would like that.
There's a Pokemon role-playing game that has free rules that I've looked into. He'd probably dig that as well, but it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. So...
Lots.
There's a lot. More than I realized. So I was joking a minute ago, but about your love of reading rules of RPG games, but can you speak to that more? Like, what about it is enjoyable for you? What do you like about it?
One of the big things is like let's go with D&D. D&D is the most popular role-playing system. That I think that's a pretty incontroversial statement. It's also the default. Like, I love D&D. I would happily play just D&D for the rest of my life. I have stories to tell that you can't tell in D&D. I don't care, how you change the rules. I don't care if you this is D&D in D20 Modern, for example. It's basically D&D 3.5 with the modern setting. And you can't tell every story that way. There are things that D&D can't do that other systems can. Um, just different systems can help you tell different stories. Like if I wanted to play a game in space, um, if I wanted it to feel like a fun space opera that focuses on discovery, I would probably go with Modifius's Star Trek. If I wanted to play in kind of a more post-apocalyptic, grittier, I would choose Stars Without Numbers. Or Stars Without Number. If I wanted a kind of a more generic one, I would go with like Via Astrum or Traveler. And so yeah, the story, or if I want, like I've announced this before, I'm going to be doing a hopefully really big game starting in January that'll stream on my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/WaywornWyrm. And it is going to be kind of a mystery of the week sort of thing. And I'm using Ashen Stars. Because the story that I want to tell is best told in Ashen Stars. If I wanted to play a low fantasy, high political intrigue game, I mean, I could play D&D. I'm not going to. I'm gonna use Green Ronin's A Song of Ice and Fire. If I wanted to play something in the Dragon Age universe, I would use Green Ronin's Dragon Age rules. And then beyond that, there are different rule sets so not only can they let you tell different stories, but sometimes they do systems better. Like D&D does Vancian magic, which uses spell slots and everything. There are other systems that don't. There are other systems that use magic points or things like that. I'm actually slowly creating a system where arcane spellcasters take non-lethal damage to cast spells.
Is there do you find a lot or a little bit of like commonality in terms of the different systems? Like, I guess as far as like mechanics or
Sometimes there are some things that are pretty standard. Most systems use you have to roll this number or higher to succeed.
yeah. I guess what I'm getting at is if you have good experience in one system,
Okay.
does that help you learn new
Um,
systems faster?
it can. And the reason why I say I can, or why I say it can, is, on one hand, if you've looked at different systems, if you get a system that's close to what you know, you can just kind of skim, or it's just like, okay, I see where they're coming with these different things. But on the other hand, if you've played, say, Shadowrun and White Wolf games, you're going to have a little bit of a rude awakening when you go to play D&D for the first time. Because those other games, you're rolling a whole bunch of dice and looking for successes on your dice and counting the number of successes. And then D&D, you're like, okay, I've brought my 32 D6s, and you're just like, here's your D20. You're gonna roll that, and you're gonna see the number on it. So, I mean, depending on the systems that you have, there can be things that you consider normal that another system's just like, no. Why do I have to do that? And that's another thing that I like to do, that I like that comes up when I do a whole bunch of different systems, is they're looking at a whole bunch of different systems, you start questioning, well, why is this common mechanic, why is it done this way? And a lot of times the answer is because the first people who did it decided to do it that way. And it's like, okay, so that means there might be better.
Yeah. So you have been, it sounds like you've been kind of, in a way, a student of these different systems, and using that knowledge to think about maybe a way that you would create a system.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I started, I'm slowly designing a system because it's just like, well, it started off with two questions that I wanted answered, or two problems I had with a lot of common systems. One of the problems is, so like D&D runs into this, where it's just like, okay, so copper pieces are the coin of the people, silver is the coin of the merchants, gold is the coin of the nobility. Cool. We run into two problems with that. Number one, if 100 copper equals a gold, that's not a lot of difference. And number two, okay, so gold is the coin of nobility. Excellent. Why does Joe Bob from the village of Hamlet have 36 gold pieces under his mattress? He's a peasant. And it's not just Joe Bob who has this like ridiculously high amount of money. And I am specifically picking on Hamlet because that is an actual place that has this problem. It's from it's one of the earliest villages made for D&D, and it lists out all of the possessions of all of the people and where they keep them, which, do you need to go into that granularity is a different discussion. But I'm picking on this because at that time specifically it was like, okay, we're trying not to give lip service to copper is the coin of the people, but the people all have a bunch of gold because all of our prices are in gold, despite that not being. So that's one of the things that I did, and one of the ways that I fixed that is it's not 10 copper to 1 silver, 10 silver to a gold, starting with 100 copper to a silver, 100 silver to a gold. And I might even change that to 1,000, depending on how playtesting goes when I get to that point. Because I really want it to feel like if you are a peasant, you're going to be dealing in copper. If you get a silver, that's amazing.
Okay, so it sounds like it makes more sense to you to have I guess in terms of the class, maybe, of the character.
The social class.
Have those demarcations more clear.
If we're going to say those demarcations exist, let's make them actually exist. And the other thing is, I've always wanted a system where it's just like, what if I don't want to be an adventurer? What if I want to be a farmer or like a village blacksmith? So my system has rules to, there's a couple of systems. One is chivalry and sorcery. Another one is Harn. That have rules for things like farming, and I'm basing my rules off of them. Just updated because Harn is from the 80s and chivalry and sorcery is from the 70s. And what I'm going to be doing is it's a lot of systems that is just like, hey, if your characters want to be something that that requires this system, here it is. If this is going to kind of be background stuff, here's a simplified version of that system. So like in my system, if you want to be farmers, then the weather is going to be a big thing, both day to day and month to month and season to season. So I'm going to have some pretty in-depth charts for how you would create that as a DM. But if you want to be adventurers, does it really matter? Not as much. So I'm also going to have a simplified version, just to be like, hey, here's how you can easily find out, is it raining today? Because it doesn't matter how much it rains today, just how hard is it raining? That's all you would need if you're adventurers.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're farmers, how much it rains might matter. So I'm going to have systems for that. And yeah, that was just the second thing. It's like, well, sometimes I want to play a farmer or a craftsman. Sometimes I want to play an adventurer. And other times, I want to play, noble versus noble. And, just like political machination games. And there's not a system that really does all of those well.
Yeah.
So why don't I make one?
Yeah. Wow. I think that's fascinating. We're getting close to the end of our time.
Yes.
But I want to see if I can do a quick summary, at least of this more in-depth conversation we had.
Mm-hmm.
So, it sounds like there's kind of maybe two bigger things about why you enjoy knowing the rules and the way different systems for tabletop RPGs work. One is that it gives you some flexibility in terms of the setting or maybe the world or the atmosphere, or talking about maybe space versus maybe like a Forgotten Realms setting versus a more current something similar to what we're in today.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you ideas and guidance about how you could run that, and then knowing those different systems also gives you ideas and ways of thinking about how you want to design your own system, and then going from there, making it more in depth or more simple depending on what you want it to do.
Yeah, because it's great to have rule systems for a lot of different things, especially if you've got a game like I'm planning on where you can do a lot. But I also wanted a concession to, you're not going to need all of these systems in every game. So, going back to that example that I used, if you're a group of adventurers and the DM is like, I want to know what the weather is, and I only have an in-depth chart that's like, okay, so today it's going to be raining pretty hard and it's going to rain 7 inches. And the DM's going to go, maybe the DM has had to roll like 4 dice to get that final result. And it's not going to need anything but, oh, it's raining pretty hard. Okay.
Yeah.
So why force them to have that? Because if they have to roll 4 dice to get it's raining pretty hard, and a whole bunch of information that they're not going to need, they're not going to use that system.
True.
So yeah, it's just. I think you summarized it fairly well. I mean, I could sit here and nitpick your summary and go, well, I didn't quite mean blah 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 blah, but that's pedantic, not very helpful. Maybe we can revisit this again sometime and drill more in depth, because I've got more to say about it, and it sounds like you've got more that you want to hear about it. So,
Totally.
But anyway, I think this was pretty helpful, and this is the last. I think this is the last of the episodes where we lost them. Several weeks ago, we're like, hey, this is take 2 for our second session.
Yes. So.
But we've been checking audio. It has been recording the correct audio.
Yay! That's good.
We'll be back next week with Thanksgiving.
Can't wait.
I don't know what we're going to do for that.
Yeah. We're gonna eat pie.
We're probably going to eat pie.
And probably other stuff.
Maybe. I mean, we only have a very small table, so...
As much as we can pile on that table.
Well, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you do the YouTube things. Like, comment, subscribe. I would say give us recommendations for the Thanksgiving episode, but we're not going to see that, because by the time this episode goes up, we'll be a couple of months ahead, hopefully, assuming no more technical issues.
Yes.
If you're and if you're on YouTube and want to see us in podcast form, there are links in the description. If you are in podcast, we're not going to tell you where you can find us in podcast, because you've already done it. But if you do want to watch video of this, you can definitely go over to YouTube. You can comment on YouTube, whether you're watching it there or just listening. That's one of the great ways to reach us. Another way is Twitter. 2 More White Dudes with Beards. We have a Patreon. If you think we're worth throwing some disposable income at, great. We definitely don't want you to use non-disposable income. I don't think either of us think that this project is worth you going without something you need.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think... There's not too many things that would qualify for that, I don't think. But if you've got a couple bucks that you want to share...
That's great.
Do it.
We've got a bunch of different tiers. We've got a patron-only Discord that is looking pretty lonely. We'd like to get some people in there. Hopefully by the time you're hearing this, it's not looking lonely.
Yes. Join in. Bring some friends.
We've got
Have
a
some
bunch
fun.
of different plans for how to do this going forward. Our first several tiers on Patreon are getting other people to professionally edit this, because I'm not the best editor out there. I'd love to get a fancy editor who can do things that I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tip jar through our podcast hosting service. I'm not quite sure yet how you access that. I'm sure that you can find a way. Worst comes to worst, it's Pinecasts that we use. Search us on Pinecasts, and I'm sure that will get you to the tip jar. Probably gonna start a Ko-fi or a coffee or whatever it is.
A kofefe?
Not a Kofefe. But that will be in case you want to do like one-time donations. One of the things that the one-time donations are going to go for is getting some sort of lav mic or similar. Because right now we just have one microphone sitting between the two of us. I'd love to get something that attaches to our shirts. Just up our sound quality.
Yes. We don't want it to be too weird.
That also makes for harder editing.
Definitely.
Also like to get better lights.
Props. I mean, there's so many. There's so many things.
There's so many things that we could use that would make this better. And in the short term, that's what we're really looking for, is to make this better, and then in the longer term, maybe make this something that can sustain us. Because, if one or both of us can not have to do a day job, then we can do more.
Yeah, I mean, and we're only going to get better with time, so.
And we're only going to get better with time. The more we do this, the more we shoot, the smoother it becomes.
So thanks for checking it out. Appreciate the support.
Definitely.
We'll check you next time.
Yeah, and we'll have a fun Thanksgiving.